heavy.
Bored.
And that led me to this question, which is really my last question. Like, I didn't have a whole lot, which is Ginsberg the most influential poet of the 20th century?
Yeah, I think he broke it open for a lot of people. Right? You can now put this in a poem. In the same way that, like, I don't know, the 50s and 60s was the same time we also learned, like, that you could put your personal experience in a poem, and that blew up. So, like, we can say this. We can say that we think he's one of the most influential poets, you know, that is still influencing poets today. And I think we'd be right to say so, and I think we'd be just as right to say that it was Sylvia Plath or Robert Lowell. You know, I think we would be just as right to say it was like the confessional poets that broke this open. They were not quite as profane when doing it.
Yeah, and they were
so yeah
after the beats. So it's like,
yeah.
For me, I would say yes. Ginsberg is. We'll cut that out. But, like, yeah, I would say that he is. And I started thinking about this after reading the book and, you know, Sophie and I texting back and forth, prepping for this episode. And I just started thinking, like, damn, yeah, like, you know, I would say Plath's up there. Plath's up there. If I was going to say, oh, who are the top 5 most influential poets of the 20th century? Yeah, Plath, even though I always say she only really wrote one book. Yeah, all you need is one, right? Like, you know, like all you need is one, and you can be one of the most influential writers of the century. But I would say he is, only because, like, you know, like, yeah, Lowell was a big influence on a lot of people, and the confessional stuff, and you can even go to, like, contemporary guys that are influencing.
Sylvia was bigger, I think.
But
at least now, I think people care more about Sylvia Plath than they do Robert Lowell for the most part.
And I think that Sylvia Plath, I think people latch onto her because she's
more popular.
And she's one of the few women that was writing at the time that was writing these really resonant, unapologetically, I would say, feminine or feminist kind of stuff, unapologetically so. And I think that's really what makes Plath so beneficial and important to the American lit scene, and why people latch onto her is because she's one of the few women that was doing that at the time. But, like, I just mean, like, Ginsberg, dude, like, and not just that, like, his association with Dylan. Like, this guy was influencing music. This guy was influencing movies. True. This guy was influencing, you know, everybody around him. He was influencing all the other writers. And he's still doing. He's dead. He's been dead for almost 30 years now, and he's still the one people are talking about. His book is still selling more than all these other people's poetry books. And, like, we could argue, okay, maybe that was because of the controversy.
Specific.
Yeah, and maybe because of the controversy or something around his, you know, being banned, the obscenity, the gay sex that he references and stuff like that at a time when people were very prudish, not only in general, but prudish specifically, right? Straight up bigoted towards gay people. So there's that. But, like, I can't get over this now that I've seen it. And I was reading this and I was seeing so much of the Whitman stuff. Since I'm glad we did the Whitman book before this. I'm glad we did the Flynn book before this, because I wouldn't have noticed it maybe if we had done this book first. And, you know, just in my reading, you know, as we go through the list of books that we have scheduled for this pod and stuff, and, like, I just kept seeing so much of his influence in other stuff that I've read. And I didn't quite put it together until I went back and read this, you know, in my 30s, you know, about a decade after I first encountered it. And just the things that you pick up. And we talk about this all the time on this podcast. Why we encourage you to pick up a copy of the book, read it. Even if you don't like it, sit it on your shelf. Or even, you know, if it's an important book, right? We're not saying go buy out a pop book that you don't like or something. But if it's a canonized work like Howl, like this, you're like, oh, it's not great. It's not for me. And then you go back 10 years later, 15 years later, 20 years later, and you read it again. And you start to pick up on all that stuff. And you just pick up on all these things, life experience that you didn't have before, that you start to see, oh, he's talking about that. Oh, I can see the influence that he had over somebody like Nick Flynn, who's writing good books today. Oh, I can see the influence that Whitman had over him. Or, like, I can see why, you know, he's the most celebrated and remembered. Like, you know, it's like that. I was thinking about this too. Like, I was listening to this stupid, I mean, this is kind of off topic, but not really. I was listening to, like, a Tarantino podcast. He was doing a podcast with somebody, and, like, you know, I like Tarantino. I like Tarantino movies. Whatever. People can say what they want. It's like he talked about this, where he said his movies, and he said he never intended this, right? But like when you went into a college dorm room when we were in college, Soph, and even before then, right? If it was a man's dorm room or men's dorm room, not even necessarily men though, women who had this too, there was probably a poster from Pulp Fiction of that still with John Travolta and Samuel L. with the guns pointed, facing in that stupid fucking apartment, right, where like that scene takes place. There was the Reservoir Dogs poster where those guys were black and white walking on the docks, and like they had the big Reservoir Dogs thing and like drippy blood letters or whatever. Like there were just these posters that influenced everything that came out of it. Like people worshipped it. And I think Ginsberg is one of those. People would have posters, not necessarily posters, but just like a picture of him with Bob Dylan in that graveyard. It's one of the most famous pictures, not just from rock and roll, but from literature, American history. Like it was Ginsberg, his bald when he was fat and bald and like old at that time, right? And he had that stupid like coat, and he was very weird and cryptic and kind of goofy. And it just, yeah, I'm like, damn, would a poet ever be able to get to that level again? I don't know. I don't know if it's possible the way the apparatus is set up right now. But yeah, that's my long-winded way of saying that, yeah, I think Ginsberg is probably the most influential poet of the 20th century.
Yeah.
And maybe you could say American poet, but, you know, I think...
Inner.
Resources. American resources.
Being bored?
Some activities are intentional, right?
It shows such a lack of gratitude for life. Bored. I aspire to boredom, I should say.
Bored. Heavy.
I am heavy.
Bored.
Has you the night sweats and the day sweats, pal? Pal, I do.